Primetime Fantasy Football is brought to you by Next Level Radio. Head to nextlevelradioonline.com for past episodes of Primetime Fantasy Football and the showcast, plus celebrity guest spotlight. Now on to this week's Primetime Fantasy Football.
People I never thought about associating with. I don't know what it is. Talk to me. Check it out. Hey, front of acres with a mansion on my land. Full jacuzzis and my neighbors can't stand. The way I live is oh so fast. Ain't got your ladies and prime time is all that.
Whoa, Dion. It's not that kind of primetime.
Yeah, man, it's Primetime Fantasy Football on Next Level Radio.
Well, alright. Yeah. You know, ever since I turned pro in 1989.
Welcome into the Week 7 edition of Primetime Fantasy Football presented by Next Level Radio. Steve is missing out. He's at a business meeting right now, unfortunately, so he's missing out. But Joe Webster is joining me right now via Epix. Joe, how's it going?
It's going well, Adam.
Of course, I forgot to mention, my name is Adam Gorey. In a little bit, we're going to play for you an interview we just completed with the Detroit News' Lions beat writer, Josh Katzenstein. He provided some great insight into the Lions in general and their matchup this week against the New Orleans Saints. Should be a good game, possibly even a shootout alert, maybe.
Although, if you're wondering about what you should do with Brandon Cooks, tune in. He'll let you know.
Yeah, and Eric Ebron even.
Yeah.
Although last week we thought the Falcons-Bears would be a shootout and didn't turn out that way.
That was so disappointing.
That really was. Don't you hate that when, this is kind of off topic, but when like you're expecting this really high-scoring game and your fantasy players are like, yeah, and it's like 13-10.
I could not have been more confident in the guy who I picked as a high, Matt Ryan, against a bad Chicago defense at home. We'll get into it more, but that was pretty disappointing.
How'd that work out?
And not well.
All right, well let's get right into the high lows. First up, we will recap last week's high-lows and just quickly go over who we got right and wrong. I got Ruben Randall wrong. He let me down twice. I will never pick him again for a high. 5 catches on 9 targets, 58 yards, 5.8 points. He plays Dallas this week. His value should go up, unfortunately, with Victor Cruz tearing his patellar tendon. But, I mean, the Giants' offense to me now is going to be inconsistent, I guess. I mean, I know this is a very week-to-week thing. You try not to overreact, but I mean, after seeing what they did for a couple weeks, it's like they regressed back to their week 1 and 2 in preseason. Like, they look terrible. So, I'm still okay as a Ruben Randall, maybe like a wide receiver 3, even with Cruz being out, though I'm not ready to commit to that wide receiver 2 yet. How about you, Joe, this week, especially against the Cowboys?
You know, I think I may. I think the reason behind that is I really think there's a lot of weeks you watch a game and you say, the Giants regressed, and I really think it was just the Eagles were firing in all cylinders, and I think that the defensive game plan that they dialed up, Bill Davis dialed up, just they knew what was going on, and the Giants could not defend it, and they were able to rush the passer. That's one of the weaknesses the Eagles have had, although this year they've been better. They haven't been able to touch a quarterback, and Eli Manning was just getting sacked and hit all night.
Yeah.
So I also think that
they had as many sacks that game as they did the whole season.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So with Victor Cruz being out, I really do think that this game, I think that you have the Cowboys coming into this game knowing what they just did in Seattle. They're beating their chest. They know they're big, and I have a feeling this could be. I'm going to call a little upset here. I think this could be an upset alert, and I think that even if it is an upset, the Giants are going to be playing from behind then, and they're going to be passing a lot, and I think Ruben Randall will have a shot. So I actually do like Ruben Randall this week.
Okay, I mean, yeah, the Cowboys are giving up the 12th least passing yards per game.
Which is amazing. They are playing outside way better than anyone expected.
Yeah, and right now the Cowboys a 6.5-point favorite. Opened up at 3. Now it's 6.5, so that's actually not good for your prediction there.
It is not at all.
My next guy is Nosha Moreno. I gave myself break even here only because he got hurt and towards
Yeah.
ACL. He's done for the year. So no need to talk about how he's going to play this week because he's not. But Lamar Miller, I think, good matchup against Chicago. If you have Lamar Miller, you're starting him. Definitely an RB2 for me this week.
Absolutely.
Next up, Steve had Joe Flacco. Couldn't have gotten that any more right. And this is
That was amazing.
just the first half, essentially. 5 touchdowns, 306 yards for 32
In the first half.
points. Yeah. He plays the Falcons this week. What do you think of him this week, Joe?
I don't think he's going to do that again. I mean, he may never do that again in his career. But they are playing at home against Atlanta, who has been struggling. So I could see him having a good week. I don't think anybody drafted Flacco as their number one. He's probably, at best, he's maybe somebody you're streaming and playing matchups. So I really would have to look at the matchup. I do think that this is a good matchup for him, but I don't know if he'd be in my top 10 for quarterback rankings this week.
Yeah, and Steve does the quarterback rankings, and they'll be on our website, nextlevelradioonline.com. Usually by Thursday evening, we get them up.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I mean, the Falcons' defense isn't great, but they're not going to give up 5 passing touchdowns, in my opinion. Next up, Golden Tate, 7 catches on 12 targets, 44 yards for 11.4 points if PPR league, 4.4 in a regular league. We kind of touch on Golden Tate in our little chat with Josh Katzenstein from the Detroit News. But what do you think of him this week against the Saints? I mean, very disappointing last week. Megatron's probably not going to play. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, the targets are there. 12 targets is really good. So, I mean, I think he's going to continue to see that. So I think that you got to keep him in your lineup, especially if you were someone, whether you drafted him as not many people handcuff a wide receiver, but if you did, you got to have him in there. And even if not, with 12 targets, there aren't a lot of receivers who are going to get more than that, and he should see double-digit targets again this weekend.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Keep him in your lineups. Just ride it out. It's an ebb and flow kind of thing, and I think you'll be all right this week.
Yeah.
And then, Joe, you had Matt Forte. Had a huge week, 27 points, 2 touchdowns, 80 rushing yards, 13 targets in the receiving game with 10 receptions for 77 yards. I mean, the guy is just he's probably going to be the highest PPR scoring running back if I had to guess.
I don't even think it'll be close, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and he plays the Dolphins this week. No way you're benching him. I mean, probably top 5 again this week, you think?
Absolutely. I mean, if he keeps receiving this many receptions and targets, he's gonna have a chance to set a record for most receptions in a year out of a running back. He's just every week now for the last 3 or 4 weeks he has had a ton of targets and receptions, and he's just becoming such a big part. And it's nice to see if you drafted him because he didn't start off as quickly in the first week or two, but he's really come on as of late. So you drafted him where you did, so you're not benching him anyway, but now you feel really good with him in your lineup.
Yeah, in a PPR league, he's going to, and he probably has been, but he's going to pay dividends for you without a doubt. I know in a standard league before last week, he was only about 12 points ahead of Alfred Morris. Now that's a little bit different now after this past week. But yeah, I mean, the receptions, the targets, it's all good. I mean, he has the most receptions in the league, and that's amongst wide receivers and running backs.
Well, it's just good. When they're winning, he's going to be running the ball and killing the clock. When they're losing, he's going to be included in the passing game. So you really can't go wrong with him.
Exactly. And he already he's 1 rush attempt shy of 100. He's already at 99.
Okay.
So, I mean, the attempts are there as well. So let's move on. Sorry, we got one more. Matt Ryan, like you had mentioned before. Bad week, 13 points. Plays Baltimore this week. Maybe a bounce back, or you're not sure? For me, I'm not sure what to make of him. I expected him at home against the Bears to have a good week. Against Baltimore, in Baltimore, I wouldn't be surprised at another 13-point week. I mean, I don't know if I can put him as a QB1 this week.
There's a reason he's going to be mentioned in my lows a little bit later. I think it's now and I am in my one league where we pay a lot of cheddar. I don't know what I'm allowed to say. He's my starting quarterback, and the first few weeks I was really excited because I'm one of those guys who wait on quarterbacks, and I thought I got a deal. And the last few weeks I have not been as excited, and I'm not happy about his matchup this week. I actually have a waiver in tonight. This is the league where our waivers actually run on Wednesday night, and I'm looking to pick up Carson Palmer, and I am going to be seriously thinking about starting Carson Palmer this week over Matt Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, Carson Palmer, it seems like he's playing. I think he played at 80%. They said last week, but
yeah,
he's
and it doesn't hurt. He's playing Oakland this weekend,
right, and he's practicing this week. So
right,
on that kind of mention of Carson Palmer, I don't think we have him on any of our lists, but obviously you're comfortable now starting Floyd and Fitzgerald, and you saw that last week.
Yep.
I don't think either of them had a touchdown all year until Sunday, and they both got one.
I know.
So let's move on to our highs for this week and see if we can do a little better than we did last week. I think we went 2, 3, and 1. So let's try and get above that 500 mark. I have Tom Brady. I know it's a Thursday night game. He's playing the Jets, and I usually don't do this because it's Thursday night, but the Jets' passing defense is not very good. Their run defense is pretty good. The Pats are going to need to throw, especially now that Ridley's out, so I just think Brady's going to have a good week. And then my second one is Mohamed Sanu playing in Indianapolis against the Colts. He's obviously the clear number one guy receiving-wise when A.J. Green's not in the lineup. Even if A.J. plays, which he's probably not this week, I don't know if he's already ruled out, but it's not looking good. I like him even when A.J. Green comes back, but especially if A.J. Green does not play this week. Mohamed Sanu, probably like a high-end wide receiver too for me.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, against the Colts this week, I mean, I think you can make the argument, and I haven't had a chance to get all of my rankings done, but he's definitely going to be a high-end number 2, and there's may be a chance I sneak him into my top 10 or 12 because, I mean, I had a chance to watch a little bit of the game last week, and he was the top target for Dalton, especially in that overtime. So I think you said everything correctly. If AJ's out, he's going to be the man. But he was playing good even when EJ was in there. So
yeah.
If I find out AJ's definitely out, there's a good chance he's going to be a low end wide receiver 1 for me. But even if AJ starts to get better and he's in there, he's going to be at worst a low-end number 2 for me. I really do like what he's doing this year, and he's actually had some good targets and some good receptions in some games, so he's a good PPR guy as well.
Yeah, 14 targets for 10 catches, 120 yards, and a touchdown last week. The next highest guy for targets, Jermaine Gresham, was 7.
Okay.
So half.
Yeah, and I liked your Tom Brady pick, even though it's a Thursday night. I also think, and I don't know how much this has to do with it, but I just don't think the coaches like each other. I just think there's so much bad blood that I think Belichick wants to win and just
run up the score.
And he may even run up the score. And let's be honest, Tom Brady in this offense has looked terrible all year until the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
Maybe they're finally clicking and they're getting things right. Every single week, Gronk is getting a couple more snaps and he's looking better. Thursday night or not, I love that call. I think Tom Brady could play big on Thursday night.
All right, well, let's talk about Steve's real quick, and we'll just each give our opinion on those. He's high on Eddie Lacy versus Carolina Panthers. Panthers are not what they used to be, according to Steve. Lacy was good 2 weeks ago in a big win. Thinks he has the makings of the same this week. And Matt Stafford against the Saints. People have been down on Calvin Johnson, or down on Stafford without Calvin Johnson, including myself and Joe. And he hasn't done well, but nothing cures that like a good old-fashioned shootout, according to Steve. So he thinks he'll get that this weekend. And we can kind of, forego Matt Stafford because you'll hear about Matt Stafford in our interview with Josh Katzenstein from the Detroit News. But let's talk about Eddie Lacy. For me, you know what? I don't know what to do with Eddie Lacy. I don't know if I like him this week, and I don't know if I like him many weeks, honestly.
Yeah, I think what I've seen the last couple weeks out of him, I'm starting to, a couple weeks ago I told you I was ready to push the panic button. I was really nervous that he was going to basically be the Doug Martin this year, where great rookie season, sophomore season stunk. So, but the last, especially the 2 weeks, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen that run where he blew the guy's helmet off running for a touchdown.
Right.
I mean, he's just looking good. I mean, I say this a lot, but especially where you drafted him at, unless you just drafted 3 or 4 straight running backs, you really don't have a choice. And I think Steve's right where the defense of Carolina isn't as strong as it has been in previous years. I say you keep him in your lineup because he's been hot now, so keep it rolling.
Oh, I mean, he was hot a couple weeks ago. He wasn't hot this past week against the Dolphins. He only had 14 rushes for 40 yards.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. So I'm thinking of the game 2 games ago. Yeah. So, but now that I think was more of a product because of what happened in the game, and they were passing a lot because they were down. So.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you watched that game. That was a good game.
I did actually. I did watch it because I watched the fake kneel down at the end.
Yeah.
So.
Or the fake spike. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, spike.
Here's a question for you. If you had to choose, like say you had a guy like Brandon Oliver, Eddie Lacy, and Lamar Miller, pick two of those.
I think I'd still go Eddie Lacy and Lamar Miller. I don't think I'd try to get too cute with that. I mean, I think Brandon Oliver had a solid week last week. Who does San Diego play this week?
San Diego plays the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think I'd probably still go with Eddie Lacy and Lamar Miller, and I'll be talking about Lamar Miller later too, because I think he's going to be somebody that is really from here on out is going to be a really good running back, probably a running back one from here on forward.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would go Miller and Oliver personally, just because. I mean, you look at last week, they're giving Starks over half of what they're giving Lacy. So they're giving Lacy had 14, Starks had 8, and you know he is kind of like a change of pace guy, and I don't expect him to.
Okay. Well, we'll do a little bet then. We'll do
Okay.
Eddie Lacy versus Oliver.
Okay, yeah, and I don't expect Lacy Starks to impede too much on Lacy's carries, but Oliver's getting them all in San Diego.
Yeah, I did read somewhere last week, and I believe I read it on Roto World, that they were expecting Starks to start to get more carries. And I know in one of my leagues, Starks is still out there, and in one of my leagues.
Not a bad pickup,
even though
yeah.
I'm not the Eddie Lacy owner, it's actually happening tonight. I'm going to be trying to put a waiver in for him because if Lacy were to go down, they do trust Starks, and he's going to get the carries.
Yeah, they do like him. So let's move on to your highs, Joe.
Okay, my highs. I went pretty off the grid. The first guy's not really. I mean, I think this is pretty obvious, but I went with Lamar Miller versus Chicago. Now that Noshawn Moreno's out for the season, Lamar Miller is going to be the guy with really no competition for carries going forward. His yards per carry this year has been awesome, his average yards per carry. So I think Lamar Miller from here going forward, if we started the season today, I think he's a top 10 back.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
if I could, and if you can somehow finagle your way into getting Lamar Miller, I would definitely pull the trigger on that. I mean, if you
agree. I just think that unless that person has not been paying attention, he knows what he has in Lamar Miller, and it's probably going to take you too much to get him.
Yeah, unless maybe he has maybe he has a couple other backs that he really likes and he needs a wide receiver. If you can finagle a Lamar Miller trade, and I think I already used the word finagle, but I like it. I know last week I think it was the one guy had mentioned about Alshon Jeffrey trying to trade him. If you can get Lamar Miller for Jeffrey, maybe throw in another backup running back just in case.
Sure.
Do it. I'm willing to pay a little bit higher of a price for Lamar Miller at this point.
Yeah, if you're hurting at running back, I agree with that. Yeah. And my other guy I put in there is Brian Hoyer versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm obviously not thinking about Brian Hoyer long term, but I know there's a lot of people out there who stream quarterbacks, or maybe you drafted a quarterback like Nick Foles and you haven't been so happy, so you've been maybe picking somebody up to play the waiver wire. And I think against Jacksonville, most quarterbacks have a lot of success against Jacksonville. So the only quarterback on a bye that you have this week that you're probably worried about is Nick Foles. So again, if you're looking for somebody to maybe plug in there, I think he could be a guy that could put up some really solid numbers. I think most of us predicted at the beginning of the year that Johnny Manziel will be playing by now, but Hoyer's been actually pretty consistent and has been doing enough to keep them, winning a couple games. So I think he'll be good this week, and I think they'll pull off the win in Jacksonville.
Yeah, Jacksonville almost giving up close to 300 yards passing a game.
Right.
I definitely like that matchup, and he's a guy who can. And we don't have Nick Foles on a list, do we?
No, we don't. Well, he's on a bye. So.
Yeah, and I know it's a bye week for him. But if you have Nick Foles, look elsewhere. We've kind of been hinting at that, but look elsewhere. Last week, I know you probably know this. I traded Steve for Phillip Rivers, and I'm so glad I did because Phillip Rivers won me the week. If I had Nick Foles in there, I would have lost.
That's good on you, yeah.
Yeah, so you need to, if you can, find the guy with two solid quarterbacks and do what you need to do because I just can't trust Nick Foles.
No, and if you can keep him on your bench, I'm not ready to drop him just because.
Right, yeah, as a backup or something.
You're talking a 5-1 Eagles team that is missing half of their line.
Yeah.
The running game is just getting started. They didn't have their top linebacker last week, even though that doesn't have as much impact on him. I can still see a scenario, and maybe this is just the optimist Eagles fan in me, I don't know. But I can still see a scenario where down the stretch come playoff time, he could be a quarterback that is starting to hit his stride. But maybe not. But I agree. At this point, you need to look elsewhere.
Yeah. And they still have Next week they play the Cardinals. They still have to play the Seahawks. So he doesn't have
Yeah.
too many easy matchups.
No, he doesn't.
And even in that, the big game against the Giants last week, he only got about, I think, like 16 points or something. So,
Yeah.
just not looking great. So let's move on to our lows from last week. I had Tony Romo. I gave myself a yellow because against Seattle, if he was playing any other team and I was low on him, I probably would have given a green. But almost 16 points against Seattle's average. It's okay. It's not bad. This week he plays the Giants. I expect him to actually have a pretty good week, approaching 20 points, maybe like 18, 19 range, like a very bottom of the QB ones maybe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he could be. I think it's a tough NFC matchup. The only thing I could think of is the only reason he may not be as good is if they are still if the Cowboys are as good as they've looked the past few weeks and the Giants are as bad as they look last week, they can be relying a lot on the run game and Tony Romo may not have to do much. But I don't see it going that way. I actually do like the Giants, regardless of what the line is saying. So I do think Romo could have a pretty good week.
Yeah, and we picked wrong last week. We all took the Seahawks to get the better of DeMarco Murray, and he just kept on trucking. I mean, there's no stopping the guy.
There's no until he's injured, which I'm still going to say is going to happen. You can't even you can't even think about benching him.
No, not a
Never.
chance. So next up, I took a shot. I was wrong. Jordy Nelson, 9 catches for 107 yards and a touchdown, 16.7 points. Plays Carolina, expecting more good things from him.
Yeah, he's so good. He's got the most. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was last week, the last time I saw it, but he was the number 1 targeted receiver in the NFL. So you just plug him in your lineup every week.
Second.
He's second now. Who's first?
Julio Jones has 1 more target.
1 more. Okay. So yeah, but I mean, Julio.
Julio.
Let's try that again, Julio. Jordy's in that the same thing as we just talked about with DeMarco Murray. You're going to put him in every single week he's playing.
Yeah, I agree. Steve had Andre Johnson. We warned him, and the prophecy was fulfilled.
Yeah.
Andre Johnson finally got a touchdown, almost at 100 yards. He plays Pittsburgh this week.
But we've never been right on him. Every time we put him on a list, I think we've been wrong.
Yeah, that's why I'm not touching him anymore. Yeah. Plays Pittsburgh this week. Pretty favorable matchup. It's a Monday night game, so I could expect another pretty okay week from him, but, I mean, he's probably like a wide receiver, low-end wide receiver 2 for me, maybe?
Maybe, yeah. I still have trouble trusting him. That was 1 week. But we say this every week. His targets have been there, and he finally got that touchdown. So we'll see. Pittsburgh defense is pretty bad, so I could see another solid week, but he's not on any of my lists.
Yeah, and next I gave him a yellow on the Broncos running backs. Hillman had 11 points. Thompson had 3.8. Thompson, I don't think, practiced today, so that's something to keep an eye on. They play the 49ers. We'll talk about Hillman in a little bit because I know you had him on a list last week, so we'll go over it then. Let's go over your lows. You nailed both of them.
I did. I had Matthew Stafford. I just kind of, with the old adage of if Calvin Johnson's out, I'm not a fan of Stafford. And that kind of worked for me last week. And then Bishop Sankey, when I picked this last week, I don't think word had come out that Sean Green was definitely going to be out.
Yeah, I had mentioned that he wasn't practicing, so he might miss the game, but it was not
I kind of thought they were just resting the veteran and giving him a little extra time. So as the week went on, I thought, this Bishop Sankey pick is going to come back to haunt me. But even getting 18 carries, he had only 61 yards, didn't really do much in the passing game, so it worked out for me. And I said this before, until Sankey shows me something, I am not going to feel comfortable putting him in my lineup any week. I even if he's playing, maybe if he's playing Jacksonville or Oakland 1 week, and I'm not even sure, I'm not looking at their schedule.
They already played Jacksonville.
That's right, yeah. So I just don't think at this point.
Actually, that game was against Jacksonville.
He played See, I'm not even looking at. So even against Jacksonville, he can't even get double-digit points. So it's saying that I am not putting him in there until he shows me he can do it. So that means he's gonna sit on my bench, and 1 week he's gonna go off, and that's fine. But until that happens, he's not going to be starting on any of my teams.
Yeah, he's a bye week guy for me. I'm probably
not
gonna stick him in there unless I have a guy on a bye and I need to.
Yeah.
Maybe the only time that's gonna happen is week 10 when there's a lot of buys, because I know for a while it's just a couple until like week 9, and he's on a bye week 9, so it doesn't matter.
The only thing I wonder, and it'd be interesting if any of our listeners tweet us or email us. I wonder what kind of trade value he has now, because I think even though he wasn't doing much at the beginning, there was that hope and that feel that eventually he was going to break out. Well, now he has his chance and nothing happened. So his trade value probably went from pretty high to possibly pretty low. So you may be stuck with him.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, but I think from this point on, Green is going to take a back seat now. I think the injury thing might just be give them an excuse to finally give Sankey the reins. And I think it'll take a couple weeks, but he'll get there. And Washington's a pretty decent matchup. So I think he could score. I could see him getting double digits. If he add a touchdown to what he got, and you're looking at like 12 points. So I mean,
and that would have been a solid week for him. Absolutely.
Right. So the thing that is not good is that he was vultured. I don't know if you saw this, but Jackie Battle got a goal line touchdown, which is annoying. Yep. So Jackie Battle, the guy who nobody should even think about looking at for their roster. But yeah, I mean, Ken Wisenhunt said nerves might have been a factor, and I don't know how much I buy into that, but I do think as the weeks go, you see him. If he can consistently get 15 to 18 touches, I think you're going to see him put up some decent numbers for you. And I think there's going to be a breakout week somewhere down the line, and it very well could be this week. I don't know. All right, well, let's move on to this week's low list. I have Zach Stacy against Seattle. Now, of course, against Seattle, it's easy pickings. But this is more like this week and the rest of the season. His snaps are declining. I think in Seattle or in St. Louis, it's becoming a pure committee at this point with Cunningham, and I think it was Mason was getting the other carries. And then second, I had Jerick McKinnon. I don't want everybody to jump the gun. They play the Bills. It is tempting to play him now that he's their guy, but I think just the matchup is too tough. The Bills give up the least rushing yards per game. It's at only 67.5. That leads every NFL team. So, Joe, how do you feel about Stacy against Seattle and McKinnon against the Bills?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious with Stacy. I mean, I agree. I think there hasn't been many guys that have had success other than DeMarco Murray last week against Seattle. So I think most week, even your top running back, you're going to wonder if you should start him. And I think for Zach Stacy, if you have better options, definitely go that route. And McKinnon, I agree. Everything you said, I agree with. With the Bills' rush defense is really good. However, I think Jerick McKinnon is really just a big play type of guy, and I think that you could see him maybe not having a huge rushing day as far as a ton of carries, but he could pull off that one big run or that one big catch. But that's not something you feel comfortable with putting in your lineup, having to rely on that. So I do agree with you, but I agree with you. However, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the day he gets a long touchdown, which makes his stats look pretty good. But overall, I agree with your lows. Right,
and just to reaffirm, Trey Mason, 5 carries for 40 yards. Benny Cunningham, 7 for 21 in a touchdown. Zach Stacy, 8 for 17.
That's not good for Zach Stacy. And I think if I went back and looked at my preseason rankings, I was pretty high on Zach Stacy. I thought some good things were coming from him, and I wasn't worried about Trey Mason, but it's not looking good for him.
No, not at all. Steve is low on Ronnie Hillman against San Francisco. He says he's doing it again, damn it. This time against the Niners, still good against the run. If he can do it twice in a row, he'll never be on Steve's low list again, but he doesn't think he can. And then he also has Eli Manning on the low list at Dallas. He had Cam close here as well, but he thought Eli was a bigger risk. Giants are a little inconsistent, as we kind of talked about earlier. So he hopes you didn't put all your eggs in this basket when he was hot, because he thinks the Reed decline is going to continue. For Ronnie Hillman, I'm not sure. I'm starting him if I have him.
Yeah.
Just because, I was worried more about losing some carries, and that didn't happen. Now, I will say this. What worries me is he did almost lose a fumble last week. Luckily, one of his own guys jumped on it, so the fumbling issue seems like it might still be there. And I believe after he lost the fumble, Juwan Thompson finished that drive, and I don't think he got another carry for a little bit, but then they got him back on the carries. So that's what worries me, is that you could see him have fumbling issues and get benched. Now, if Juwan Thompson doesn't play, maybe they're not as eager to do that with C.J. Anderson, as C.J. Anderson didn't really, I don't think he got any touches. But if you have him, you're playing him, just, don't think you're going to be able to rely on him for sure next week. Like, don't have him and then be like, all right, next week I can start him too, because he could end up getting benched. And then Eli Manning, I agree. I just think he's going to be inconsistent, and he's kind of, I thought he was going to have a better matchup last week. He didn't, and that just shows he's not reliable like I kind of figured he was.
Overall, I think I agree with both. I think the Ronnie Hillman, I was wrong on him last week. I had him on my don't buy the hype list. All the reports I read going into last week was that it was going to be more of a committee than people expected. And then Ronnie Hillman, I think he had 24 carries, and he led by a lot. So
yeah, he gets more than Ball was getting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Yeah, but I still kind of feel the same way as Steve is. Ronnie Hillman's had this chance before. 2 years ago. when he
Every
came in,
year, right, Joe?
Every year I say that, yeah, right? And then it is 3 years, but last year they talked about him, and then Moreno beats him out, and I don't know. I still feel like I need to see it again. So, but he did prove me wrong last week. But I like what Steve said. He's going to do it again. He's sticking to his guns. And again, because I am definitely on the one in the minority here, but because I do think that the Giants can do something this week. I think I am a little higher on Eli Manning. I don't think he'd make it into my top 10, and I'll be anxious to see where Steve ranks him. But it wouldn't surprise me if he has a good week. But I think losing Victor Cruz is really going to hurt him overall.
Yeah.
But I think he could be a solid guy next week. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and just real quick before we move on with Ronnie Hillman, I believe he got a few goal line or pretty close to the goal line carries and just could not get in there, which is kind of what you liked from Monte Ball. Is that if they needed a touchdown, Monte Ball is probably going to get you a touchdown down at the goal line. With Ronnie Hillman, I'm not sure they're going to be as confident, and they might actually start to pass a little more. So as you saw, Julius Thomas had, I think, 2 touchdowns this week. You could see that a little more often. So I think, with Ball being out, I think Thomas's value even goes higher because of that.
I agree. And maybe even someone like Welker, who's so good down low and doing slants and things like that. He actually could maybe see a little uptick when they're down close. He
didn't have a great week, and he hasn't yet since he's been back. But I think give it a couple weeks. He only had 1 target. He had the 1 catch for 8 yards, but he's a weapon that they're gonna.
There's just so many weapons there, and then they're probably concentrating on everywhere else, and it just. One of these weeks, one of the other receivers are going to get shut down, and Welker's going to have a big week. But
Welker was involved in that trade I did for Philip Rivers.
I saw that, yeah.
So, let's go into your
my lows. I put Matt Ryan on my low list. I mentioned it earlier. I'm really starting to get nervous as an owner, and right now I am really leaning towards, as long as I win my auction tonight, I'm going to be starting probably Carson Palmer over Matt Ryan. The defense for the Ravens has been solid. And I just think Matt Ryan's one of those guys where it's pretty obvious. Up until last week, home games he was great. Away games he was subpar. And then even last week at home he was bad. And his line has been really beat up. So Matt Ryan's really getting hit and rushed a lot back there. So going forward as a Matt Ryan owner, I think you need to be a little worried. It's not time to cut him or anything like that. But he was the only quarterback I drafted because his bye wasn't until week 9. And I really just didn't think there was any guys I would feel better starting over him. And obviously I'm going to be carrying a second quarterback from here on out. So the other guy I have is Andre Williams. I was not really impressed with him and the way he looked against the Eagles. But again, I mentioned it earlier. I'm not sure if that was more of a result because, obviously the Giants had to pass a lot because they were down. And also the Eagles defense just... I don't know what they did different, but Andre Williams had nowhere to run. Anytime they tried to sweep outside, left or right, they were all over him. So I don't really know what to expect as much, but I just didn't think he looked that great against the Eagles. And the Cowboys defense, we mentioned it also a little earlier, they're a little better than most of us expected. So if the Giants are down a lot, that means they're going to be passing a lot, and Andre Williams is not a pass catcher. An interesting stat I heard last week, Andre Williams, his senior year at Boston College, he was a Heisman finalist. He did not have 1 reception.
Yeah, I think I heard that before, yeah. It's
crazy.
Amazing. Yeah.
It is crazy. So he's not someone who's catching the ball out of the backfield. So if like everybody's predicting the Giants are going to be down big and they're going to have to pass a lot, you can pretty much write Andre Williams off.
Yeah, I think actually what you're seeing here with this Giants offense is that, obviously they're going to miss Victor Cruz, but I think they really missed Rashad Jennings and that ability for a guy to come out of the backfield and catch some passes. So, I think that negatively affects, obviously, Eli Manning. And, maybe when Rashad Jennings comes back, maybe, they'll get back on the flow and maybe Manning's points goes up a little bit. But, yeah, I agree. Andre Williams is, we talked last week, Ronnie Hillman, Brandon Oliver, and Andre Williams were the 3 biggest pickups. And Williams had that good matchup against the Eagles, or what we thought was a good matchup.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm ranking them Oliver, Hillman, Williams now. Before, I think Williams I had above Hillman. But I think I switched those now.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. I'd put him at number 3 of those 3.
All right, well, stick around because in just a few seconds, we're going to be playing our interview with Detroit Lions beat writer for the Detroit News, Josh Katzenstein.
Hey everybody, Ben Beck from Next Level, inviting you to join myself and Adam Gorey every Sunday for another episode of the Showcast. We bring you the best stories in pop culture, the newest stories in film and television, as well as movie reviews, what's going to be released in DVD, as well as coming to the box office for the weekend, and much, much more. All you have to do is search Next Level Radio under the iTunes Store and subscribe, or simply go to our website, www.nextlevelradioonline.com, and you can find our current shows as well as all of our past shows right there on the website. So we hope you join us every Sunday for another new episode of the Showcast.
Hi, this is Chris Gear from the awesome new FX show You're the Worst, and you are listening to Next Level Radio.
Thanks for listening to Primetime Fantasy Football. Send your questions in to primetime@nextlevelradioonline.com. primetime@nextlevelradioonline.com. And make sure to check out our weekly rankings, nextlevelradioonline.com, and go to the Primetime Fantasy Football tab. We'll post the link on Twitter and Facebook at NXT Level Radio or facebook.com/nextlevelradioonline.
All right, we are joined by Josh Katzenstein from the Detroit News. He's the Detroit Lions beat writer. Josh, we really want to thank you for joining us this week on Primetime Fantasy Football.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So I guess let's get right into it here. First off, let's start off with Matt Stafford. I mean, he's been a little inconsistent this year. Weeks 1, 2, and 4 were pretty good for him. 3, 5, and 6, not as good. Part of that probably has to do with Calvin Johnson, not being quite 100% healthy. What type of Matt Stafford do you think we can expect this week against the Saints in a possible shootout? And do you think there are any type of long-term concerns with his inconsistency week to week?
Well, I think there probably should be some long-term concerns at this point. I mean, it's year 6 for Stafford, and I mean, besides, the first half of 2011 and maybe the first half of 2013, I mean, he really hasn't proven, to be a consistent quarterback. And, I know that, he's still young. I think he's 26 now. So, I mean, you'd think there's still time, but, I mean, when you see, other quarterbacks like a Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, even RG3 was great for a year. I mean, all those young guys that come in and take the league over pretty quickly, I mean, he has not been able to show that, in his first 6 years. So I think we sort of know, or at least I have a good feeling of what we're getting from Stafford week to week. And I mean, it's just, 1 week it'll be great. The next week it'll be subpar, and it's just really hard to predict. I think, Calvin Johnson being out definitely hurts. I mean, one of the Bills defensive backs said after the game a couple weeks ago that, once Johnson went out, it looked like he didn't know what to do. And I think that's accurate. I mean, and now that Golden Tate's a primary guy, I mean, he just, zones in on Tate and can't really distribute the ball elsewhere. So, it's hard for me to expect Stafford to, find any consistency the rest of the year. But, I mean, he's going to have those big days, maybe when you least expect it. And I think this could definitely be one of them, just because the Saints, I think, are 28th in points allowed, and, Jarvis Bird's down, and I think Joe Lombardi, the Lions offensive coordinator, should have some tricks up his sleeve going against his former team.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely has the weapons on the team, for sure. And obviously, like we said, with Calvin Johnson being one of the big ones, with his ankle injury earlier in the season, he was used as a decoy a couple times before he was finally held out last week in week 6. What do you think the odds that he plays this week against the Saints? And if so, how effective do you think he'll be? Or do you think he'll just be a decoy again if they put him out there?
I really think there's probably like a 10% chance max that he plays this week. I mean, just based on what Calvin said today. I mean, it doesn't sound like he's in any hurry to get back just because he knows he's not 100%, knows he can't be the player that, he has been throughout his career. And I mean, with a high ankle sprain, I mean, if you rush it coming back, then you can make it even worse and, break something. So I think he's going to take as much time as he needs. The Lions aren't going to say, just when he'll be back. But, I mean, I think the likeliest scenario is probably that he's out this week and, probably like a game-time decision next week in London, just because they'll have the bye week, which will give him a little more time to recover. But, if for some reason he does play this week, I wouldn't expect him to be that effective. I mean, for fantasy purposes, it's always tough to say because, he could get 2 long touchdown passes and then sit the rest of the game. But, I mean, just based on what I saw from him against the Jets and against the Bills, when he's not right, it doesn't look like he's going to be able to produce very much.
Yeah, he was definitely extremely ineffective. And speaking as a Calvin Johnson owner in a couple of my leagues, it was not that great. And I know Jim Caldwell had mentioned, or not mentioned, but kind of hinted maybe they could rest him through week 9. So I mean, with it only being a couple weeks away, maybe that's the best situation for him and for owners of him. Now, Reggie Bush was out last week, another injury for the Lions. Theo Riddick seemed to fill the Reggie Bush role. I know he had, I think it was 5 catches. If Calvin Johnson doesn't play this week, and it looks like Bush will be playing, do you think he'll benefit as much as Riddick did? I mean, I know Tate was expected to get a lot of that Calvin Johnson benefit, but it seemed like Theo Riddick got more benefit than anybody. So do you think Reggie Bush could reflect that as well?
I don't think so. It is hard to say just because, Bush is going to be motivated going against his former team, the Saints, who, of course, drafted Mark Ingram and then traded him away. But, Sean Payton knows Reggie Bush better than anyone else in the NFL, I would say. So, I mean, they're going to know how to shut him down. Plus, I think, even if Bush is back, I've said, all off season and into the beginning of the year, I think Joique Bell is really the feature back on this team. He's going to get most of the, carries, especially between the tackles. He's going to get most of the goal line touches. And, the Lions, for the most part, they've been rotating backs like every play. But, I think, the consistent touches are going to be there more with Joique Bell. And, Reggie could definitely, bust an 80-yard, screen or something. But, I think a bigger reason Theo Riddick was successful was just because the Vikings didn't have a lot of tape on him. I think that's what one defensive player said after the game, that, they didn't know much about this guy, and then he showed up and looked like Reggie Bush. And, that's another thing to factor in. Just, I know Riddick is hurt too, and, he missed practice today, so I don't know if he'll be available. But, if he is, based on what he showed last week, he demands more touches than he got the first 3 games as well. So I think, it's going to be hard to trust Bush. But as I said, and as is the case with a lot of these guys, it's really boom or bust from week to week.
Right.
Josh, so you also mentioned, I was reading your Twitter feed today, and you mentioned with one of your followers about Ebron having a breakout game this week. So I want you to kind of break down, why do you think this week is the game that he'll break out, and what do you think long-term from here to the end of the season fantasy owners can expect from someone like him?
Well, I actually thought Ebron, could have been like a fringe top 10 tight end, just because what I saw from him, this off season was just an innate ability to get open, whether it was short or long, intermediate, it didn't matter. He was really good at using his speed and his athleticism to, find openings in the defense. And that's what he's done, when he's been on the field. And last week, for the first time, he played more than Brandon Pettigrew. I don't know if that was just a 1-week thing. I know Pettigrew left the game early, and it looked like he was limping, but he came back on. So, you got to think that as long as Joe Fortier is out, Ebron's going to get his chances. And the only reason I think he hasn't, excelled thus far is because, for whatever reason, either the coaches or Matthew Stafford don't fully trust him. He's getting open. There was a game rewind picture that I and a few other people circulated on Twitter last week after the Bills game, where he was open for what would have been an 80-yard touchdown right down the seam. That's like a 60-yard touchdown, actually. So if Stafford can find him, he's going to be productive, just because behind Golden Tate and the running backs, none of the other receivers have proven that they can get open on a consistent basis. So if Stafford can get on the ball, with his limited touches, like last week, he got a 12-yard catch on the first play of the game, and then didn't have a catch again until the end of the first half, and only 2 more looks in the second half. So I think if Stafford gets in the ball, I think he should play well, and I think with Joe Lombardi, the expectation was that the tight ends would be involved. So against his old team, I think that might be something that he finally shows.
Okay, yeah, I always found it interesting. It seems like a lot of the elite offenses in the league really utilize their tight end, and I think that's something that I've noticed over the last few years with Stafford and the Detroit offense, as explosive as it is. I don't think they've really ever had a tight end that they felt comfortable going to, but maybe that's just a product of having someone like Calvin, and you can just throw him the ball all day.
Right, and it's really weird, because when Ebron has gotten the catches, whether it's something short or intermediate, he hasn't busted a big one just yet. But he looks like he's, like a Julius Thomas type guy, where he just gets it, immediately goes upfield, and then, he's a load for safeties or linebackers to bring down. So, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why they're not utilizing him more just because Calvin Johnson is out, and you figure if you get him involved in the middle, it'll open things up for Golden Tate on the outside, and, it should help the running game too. But, at some point, if Calvin Johnson's still hobbled, they're going to have to get him involved because, if they don't, this offense is going to continue to struggle.
Absolutely. So last question I have is, I watched an online chat today that you had with Rod Beard talking about the Lions defense. And to be honest with you, I was surprised with how high they ranked. I knew they were really solid. I didn't realize their numbers that they put up so far this year. And you mentioned something about them basically having a 9-man front because of all of the rotating they do. So if you don't mind, for our listeners, explaining a little bit about how that works and how they're rotating the players in. And as a follow-up to that, do you think that's been one of the rotating has been why they've been so successful against the run this season?
Well, I don't think that's the main reason. I think the main reason they've been so good, on defense is because they just have better players, or at least players who are, having career years for the most part. I mean, with they've been rotating like this, for the past several years. It's something that comes from the defensive line coaches, Chris Kasurik and Jim Washburn. I think it has more to do with them than it does the new defensive coordinator, Terrell Austin. But, when you bring in, guys like Sue is having, an all-pro level year. Fairley's probably having the best year he's ever had. C.J. Mosley's solid. Those three guys in the interior. And then the fourth guy in there is a rookie, Karan Reed. Doesn't play very much, but he'll get in if he needs to. And then on the edges, Ziggy Ansah looked incredible last week. Jason Jones is solid, especially against the run. And then George Johnson's having the best year of his career with 4 sacks already. Didn't have any in his first 3 seasons. Darryl Tapp's playing really solid against the run. He hadn't been productive his past couple of years. And then Devin Taylor, who's in his second year. I mean, we haven't seen as much of him, but I mean, the coaches are really confident in all these guys, and the fact that they are so fresh has definitely helped. But I think what's more important is that they're all playing really well.
Now with with Jim Washburn there, the Lions are they still running the wide 9 technique?
Not really. I mean, sometimes, and that was something that Terrell Austin, told us before the season that, there might be some plays they do, some plays they don't. They're definitely doing it a lot less than they did the last few years with Jim Schwartz at the helm. But, I mean, they still mix it in. But, yeah, I mean, overall they just have they just have a lot more diversity in the scheme. They blitz a lot more. They'll disguise coverages a lot more. And, I mean, the thing with the defensive line that Glover Quinn, the free safety, pointed out today is that they're having so much success because the secondary is playing so good. Teddy Bridgewater didn't have anywhere to throw the ball on Sunday. So, I mean, as soon as he, went through all of his reads, then he'd get sacked. So, I mean, the whole defense is just playing lights out. And as long as all 3 levels are playing well, I think that the D-line will continue to have success.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously with the Saints this week, a tough matchup as high-powered as we know the Saints offense can be. Is there anybody on that Saints team that you see might actually match up well against this defense, or is it kind of, they're so 100%, complete at this point that really they should be able to stop even a guy like Drew Brees?
Well, I think the thing that bodes well for the Saints is that they've only given up, I think, 4 sacks. I haven't confirmed that, but someone kept saying that today out in Allen Park. They've only given up 4 sacks this season, which is just a ridiculous number, and it has a lot to do with Brees' ability to get the ball out fast. And, he can move around a little bit in the pocket. But, I mean, if he can hit those guys, quickly, and if any of his receivers can get open quickly, I think that's definitely a recipe for success against the Lions. And one guy, I know I'm starting him in a couple of my leagues this week will be Brandon Cooks, just because, the Lions haven't really struggled with many receivers, but one guy they did struggle with was Sammy Watkins. And I think, when you put the speed in there, I think Cooks should, be able to get, enough space that, Brees will be able to find him. Plus, if Jimmy Graham is out, Sean Payton said that he's not sure he will be, but, I mean, everything out of New Orleans sounds like he'll be out. I think, Cooks will be the guy to benefit the most just because Colston, doesn't necessarily have the speed, and I think, even though he's a savvy receiver, Rasheed Mathis, I would fully expect to, take him out for the most part.
Yeah, oh, there you go. You heard it here first, guys. Brandon Cooks and Eric Ebron. Huge weeks this week. All right, well, Josh.
So you guys aren't big on Cooks?
Oh, I do like Cooks actually. I know a couple weeks ago I had him on my high list. So no, I I think he at this point has surpassed Colston as Breeze's number one wide receiver for sure on that team. And
I agree.
I agree with you. If Graham doesn't play, I mean, I could see him getting double-digit targets this week for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, we really appreciate you joining us. Everybody, you can check Josh out on Twitter, like we said, at Jay Katzenstein, and that's JKATZENSTEIN. And then you can also check him out. He writes for the Detroit News, beat writer for the Detroit Lions, www.detroitnews.com. Josh, like I said, really appreciate it. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Definitely, anytime, guys.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
All right, well, we really appreciate Josh being able to join Joe and I. It's a great pleasure. We'll have to have him on again sometime. Make sure, like we had mentioned, follow him on Twitter at Jay Katzenstein, and then read his stuff at the Detroit News. Very knowledgeable.
Yeah, he was good.
Yeah, he was fun to talk to. So maybe we'll have him again later in the year. Same with Sheil from the Eagles that we had talked to, I think, week 1.
Yeah.
And we're going to try and, we're working on getting more guys from around the league. Obviously, they're very busy. So, always keep your eye on, because this one was not last minute, but I don't think we knew, last week when we were recording the podcast. So we don't always know during the podcast. So that's why it's good to, listen every week, subscribe on iTunes, follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Next Level Radio Online. And then Twitter is at NXT Level Radio. So let's move on.
He was a no one, a 0-0. Now he's a hunter. He's a hero.
Prime time fantasy football's 0 to hero.
0 to hero, just like that.
First, let's recap last week's 0 to Heroes. 3-0 for all of us.
Yeah, we did good.
Yeah, so we did well, yes. Kelvin Benjamin, I had 7 receptions on 8 targets for a touchdown. 10.9 points, but I gave myself the green because if you do that in a PPR, 10.9 is good in a standard. 17.9 is really good in a PPR. So he plays Green Bay this week. I'm leaving him in as a wide receiver too. What about you?
Absolutely. I think he's, him and Cam have a pretty good chemistry going on. I think he's going to be pretty much a must start going forward.
Yeah, I think the only thing he did miss practice on Wednesday, but it was an injury where he came out of the game and then went back in. So, I mean, I guess it's listed as a concussion. Okay. But if he, was able to come back in the game, it's obviously not something that's, he has to go through any type of protocol. So maybe he just had a little head issue.
Yeah.
Steve had LaShawn McCoy, called it there, 15 points. He has a bye this week. Joe, you had Brandon Marshall. 6 catches, 9 targets, 113 yards, so 11.3 points. Also gave you the green because that's 17.3 in the PPR.
Right.
Playing the Dolphins this week, not benching him at all in any situation pretty much at this point.
No, I think all 3 of those guys are going to keep going this week. Well, McCoy, you're obviously not. You're going to wait for him to come off the bye, but all 3 of those guys you're going to keep in your lineup.
Give him the green light, yep.
Give him the green light.
So let's move on to this week, who we got. I actually, and this is kind of taking a stab here, because I know, just in general, I'm not high on him. I know none of us really are. You actually dropped him in the league. Cordero Patterson at the Bills. If he's going to have a good game, it's this week. Buffalo's given up 270 passing yards per game, so as good as they are against the run, they make it up for the pass because they give up the 7th most passing yards. His targets are there. Last week is a tough matchup, so I do think that he has that ability. I think with Teddy Bridgewater in there, he does have a better upside there. And, like I said, last week was a tough matchup against the Lions. That's just a really good defense, and you heard us talking about it in our interview with Josh. But I do think he's going to have a better game this week. Maybe not, he had a really bad game last week. Maybe not like a 15 or 20-point game, but, in a PPR, I could see him getting about 15 points. And maybe like double digits for you in a standard league. Joe, what do you? I know you, like you said, you're not high on him, but what do you think about him this week against the Bills?
I agree with what you're saying. This could be a pretty good week for him. However, he did have a tough matchup last week. But what was his excuse in week 4? What was his when he played Atlanta? Week 3 against New Orleans. And even week 1 when he had the big week, it's because he had a huge rushing touchdown.
Matt Castle.
But he had 3 receptions for 26 yards other than that. He hasn't had more than 4 receptions in a game yet. So I think all of your points are valid, but just because he hasn't done it, I'm gonna stick to he's still not going to do it.
Okay. I'm just betting. I mean, he led the team in targets, so I just think with the matchup, hopefully those targets produce more than 2 catches.
No,
like they
you
did
make
last
you
week.
make very good, valid reasons, and I think I'm a little bitter because I drafted him in our keeper league, and I thought
And you dropped
where
him.
I drafted him, he could be a stud, and then he could be someone I keep for a number of years, and so I'm a little disappointed in him.
Well, I appreciate the compliment. Steve has Percy Harvin at St. Louis, saying he's looking for a comeback for the entire Seahawks offense. Harvin will catch it, run it, return it, if you get return points. Big all-purpose day, he thinks, against a team that's not as good as people think. And we kind of saw that, last week.
Does anybody think St. Louis is good?
I don't know what people he's talking about, but not us people. So,
No.
yeah, I think Percy Harvin's a guy who can do it any week. I mean, you saw the 1 week he had three touchdowns taken back, and he's just a guy that no matter where they are on the field, he has the ability to score, and that's always a plus.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. Not much else to add to it.
You want to go into your?
Yeah, I'll go into mine. So I have Andre Ellington. Last week he had the Redskins actually do okay against the run. He only had 19. He had 19 rushing attempts, which is actually the most he's had all year. But he only was able to gain about 67 yards. So his average the last 3 weeks, his rushing average has not been great. 3.4, 2.0, and then 3.5. And he did have 6 receptions for 26 yards. So I'm hoping it's a bounce back week. If you've listened to this podcast, I'm very big on Andre Ellington. I've got him in a couple of my leagues. So I think he's got a great matchup this week against Oakland. And kind of like what you just said with Cordell Patterson, if he's going to have a big week, this should be the week he does it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The target. He also is coming out of the backfield too. He had 6 catches on 9 targets for 26 yards. So, any running back that also is getting that amount of targets and that, I mean, he had 25 touches.
Yeah.
You can't argue with that. I mean, if you're gonna get points, most of the time you need some touches, so that always helps. But yeah, I agree.
I kind of saw him as a Matt Forte type this year, and he just hasn't produced quite as well.
No.
We still have a lot of fantasy football season left, and I don't think he's going to get to the Matt Forte level, but that's why I was so high on him, because he was so good out of the backfield, so dynamic last year when he did touch the ball, and he wasn't touching the ball a ton, so I really thought, this year he'd be getting more touches, and that would equal into basically like a Matt Forte light. And it hasn't quite done that. But, lots of time left.
Unlike Zach Stacy, he's the only one getting carries.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Oh, by the way, quick before we move on, Oakland last week, you saw what Brandon Oliver did. So I think Andre Ellington can do that as well. So let's move on to our Don't Buy the Hype. We'll recap last week. Austin Davis I got the green light on, only 12 points. Another tough matchup this week against the Seahawks. So again, leaving him on the bench. But I think, he was drawing comparisons, as you heard, if you watch the game, to like Drew Brees and stuff like that. I don't know if I see that, but I think he can be a good streaming quarterback, matchup pending. And this matchup is not good. So,
No.
Joe, would you agree?
Yeah, I think he kind of somebody I would fit into that, the Brian Hoyer category as a streaming quarterback. And I think that they're going to be passing a lot because they're going to be down. And I think there's going to be games where he will put up really solid numbers for you.
Yeah, I like him a little less now because he almost lost me my fantasy matchup this week.
Yeah.
I was up 17 points, and the guy I was playing against had San Francisco's defense. And I think with like a minute or 2 left, San Francisco's defense had what did they have? I think they had 6 points. I'm like, yeah, this should be fine. And he throws a freaking pick 6, gets on 8 points, and I'm only up by 3. And 53 seconds left, they're still throwing the ball. I'm worried my head off that he's going to throw another one.
I'm just impressed you were still awake.
Yeah,
I was long asleep at that point.
Yeah, I don't get up for work until 8 o'clock, so I'm fine. That's another subject, though. Let's move on to Steve. He got a green light on Tim Wright. 1 catch, 1 yard, 1 touchdown, one Highlander. 6 points against the Jets this week. Again, he didn't play a whole lot of snaps, so
No.
He's getting a touchdown, but that's all he's getting. I mean, not bad for a guy who had 1 catch, but
no, it's funny. We're talking about how Steve was right on him, but it's funny because I had Travis Kelce in a league who was on a bye last week, so I was looking for a guy to pick up, and I was between Tim Wright and Ebron. and I went with Tim Wright. And when I saw he had a touchdown, I thought this is great. And then I looked at his stat line: 1 reception, 1 yard, 1 touchdown. But for a fill-in for 1 week, I'm actually okay with that. But yeah, I agree that Steve deserves a green light on this. He was not as good as I had hoped for.
Yeah, 16 of 74 snaps, and if you have that same choice this week, go Ebron. You heard
Absolutely.
Josh
Yeah, you just heard Josh say it. Yep.
So, and then you had Ronnie Hillman. I gave you the red.
You should give me the red. I was wrong.
Get double digits. Yeah, we talked
I
about
feel
him.
like 100 yards, you get it. And again, I base that on the fact that Ronnie Hillman's given the chance before, didn't seize it, and then also I read reports that they were really going to split the carries a lot more, and they did not. So Ronnie Hillman proved me wrong, and we'll see if he can do it again this week.
Yeah, and so let's move on to our guys for this week. I have Torrey Smith for Don't Buy the Hype versus Atlanta this week. He only has 15 catches on 34 targets in his 6 weeks, so less than half. Atlanta's kind of middle of the pack to fantasy wide receivers, and obviously, he had all his points in the first half because that's all he needed. But I just don't, I don't see him as consistent. I would much rather be starting Steve Smith Sr. At this point, and I think, take away his 2 touchdowns, and obviously you can say that for a lot of people, but he would have only had, I think, like 5 points.
Yeah, he had 51 yards. So I am really far down on him. I mean, the problem with it is, here's what I see happening. Most people probably had Torrey Smith on their bench last week. There's going to be some people who think he's back, and they're going to put him in your lineup this week, and you are going to be disappointed.
Yeah, that's like the Sammy Watkins thing you ran into at the beginning
exactly.
of the year.
So, and that was exactly why Sammy Watkins was on my low list that week, because I knew people were going to overreact to it, and I knew he'd be a little bit more inconsistent.
So you're saying I'm taking a page out of the Joe Webster book.
You're basically
football?
just copying off of me. Yeah,
that's
so
not good.
I'll take the credit.
Maybe I should change it.
But no, I agree. I like that pick. I think Torrey Smith is too inconsistent, and I think if you're putting him in this week, you're going to be unhappy.
Yeah, and Steve had T.Y. Hilton versus Cincinnati this week. He's never been high on T.Y. Hilton as it is, but he's a boomer bust player, and we kind of saw that last week was a boom. This week's bust is against a good Bengals secondary with something to prove. And, the reason I put Kelvin Benjamin on my 0 to hero, even though he was playing the Bengals, is because he's the guy there. I mean, other than Greg Olsen, he's really not getting that many, or there's nobody competing with him for targets for the most part. T.Y. Hilton has a lot of, not a lot, but a decent amount. I mean, even the tight ends get some looks, but, with Reggie Wayne there, I just think Reggie Wayne's more consistent, even though he didn't have a great game last week. But I agree, T.Y. Hilton's a boomer bust, and I could easily see him busting against the Bengals.
I'm calling boom, although I'm huge on T.Y. Hilton right now.
Wow.
If you look back, week 3, 80 yards against Jacksonville. Week 4, 105 yards against Tennessee. Week 5, 90 yards against Baltimore. Houston, 223. So in the last 4 starts, he hasn't had less than 80 yards receiving. Now, what's missing are his touchdowns, and that is an issue. I thought he'd have more touchdowns. He's only got 1 on the year, and that came last year. But in a PPR league, I mean, this guy is huge. I mean, he's had 9 receptions the last 2 weeks. He's getting the targets. He's getting the looks. I actually disagree. I would like to have T.Y. Hilton in my lineup this week.
Oh, check Joe's rankings for where T.Y. Hilton is.
He will be high.
NextLevelRadioOnline.com. And by the way, if you need the link to that, if you don't want to search on Next Level Radio for it, just go to Facebook.com/NextLevelRadioOnline or follow us on Twitter at NXT Level Radio, and we'll have the link posted. So, Joe, let's go into your Don't Buy the Hype for this week.
I picked Derek Carr. Statistically, or I should say fantasy point-wise, he had a really good week last week. He had 283 yards and 4 touchdowns with an interception, but he was only 18 of 34. So he really didn't have that great of a game. Statistically, as far as passing percentage, he just was able to get 4 touchdowns against San Diego. I'll be honest, I didn't have a chance to see the game, so I don't really understand how he has that bad of a passing percentage, but still pulls off 4 touchdowns. I think Derek Carr, I don't think anybody has him in their league and is feeling comfortable. He may be a guy that you have as a streaming quarterback, but I would rather have Brian Hoyer this week, and he's playing a tough Cardinals defense, so I just don't see Derek Carr putting up those types of numbers again. I could see him doing an 18 of 34 for another 260, 70 yards. I don't see 4 touchdowns coming his way.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Maybe if Derek Carr had a little more rush ability, he only had 1 rush for 2 yards. Maybe, a lot of times you see the younger quarterbacks, even Andrew Luck gets rushes. And you just don't see that from Carr. So I think he'd be a little higher on my list, even as far as rookies go, if that were the case. But yeah, I mean, you saw Kirk Cousins against the Cardinals. He had a decent game. I mean, fantasy purpose wise,
right?
As well. So I think it's possible, but I'm just not expecting much from Derek Carr. All right, so let's move on to our last segment. Actually, second to last because we do have a Twitter question, but take your pick. For the tight end portion of this tight end roulette we're doing, we only did tight ends and running backs this week, but I think eventually we're going to start doing all 4 positions. What do you think, Joe? You like that idea?
Absolutely, we should, yeah.
So for the tight end portion, we actually kept it game to game. So we picked a tight end from each of these 3 games. So we only have 2. The only reason I think we didn't do all 4 this week is because Steve isn't here. Obviously, like we said, he's at a business meeting. So
did you put that in quotes?
Yes.
A business meeting?
Air quotes.
Yeah, there you go.
With Tennessee at Washington, Jordan Reed or Delaney Walker? Take your pick, Joe.
Yeah, with Jordan Reed's injury history, I'm going to stick with Delaney Walker. He's been pretty solid all year.
I am too, but Jordan Reed did have a good game last week.
He did.
I think he had, 8 catches?
He did. I think he may have been
8 for 92.
I think he may have led the team in receptions, actually, but it's only a matter of time before he gets hurt again.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But definitely Delaney Walker, just more.
But this week,
there.
This week, yeah.
Yeah. So Kansas City at San Diego, Travis Kelce or Antonio Gates? Take your pick.
I got to stick to my guns. I'm going to go Travis Kelce.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I'm going to go Travis Kelce too. I just think Antonio Gates, unless he gets a touchdown, he's not going to be useful to you.
Yep,
I think Travis Kelce is
every week he's becoming a little bit more and more a part of that offense.
Yeah, and I think he can get you yards in addition to touchdowns.
Yep.
Giants at Cowboys, Larry Donnell or Jason Witten?
Cool, that's a tough one.
That's why I put it on here.
Yeah, that's why you put it in there. I think I'm going to go Donnell. Even after the bad week, Witten just hasn't done much all year.
I hate to agree with you, but I think I'm going to say Donnell as well.
Yeah, how about it?
Well, I hate to agree with you on all 3, especially. So let's move on to running backs. This one we're not game to game, but okay. Lamar Miller at Chicago or Andre Ellington at Oakland?
I've been staring at this for a while now, trying to figure out what I want to do. Because I've been so high on Andre Ellington, I think, oh man.
Yeah, and I tried to pick guys who you might actually be between. So a lot of you won't see Matt Forte on this take your pick.
Yeah, I think after what Brandon Oliver was able to do last week, I think I'd have to go Ellington this week because of the matchup. If he was playing almost anybody else, I'd probably lean Miller.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to go Andre Ellington just because I think it'll be a closer game. Mm-hmm. And they'll probably be. I think Miami could get down to Chicago. Not saying they're going to, but there's more potential for them to get down to Chicago than Arizona to Oakland. So if they do get down, Lamar Miller has the pass catch ability, but if their game plan will get thrown off if they get down. So yeah, I would agree with Ellington, but both good plays this week.
Yeah.
Ben Tate at Jacksonville or Brandon Oliver versus Kansas City?
I'm going with Tate.
Yeah, I think actually I'm going to go Oliver on this one.
Okay.
Jacksonville's actually not terrible against the run.
No, they're not.
So, I mean, pass-wise, sure, you can throw them all day. But against the run, let me just look it up real quick because I had it earlier and I forget what it was. I think they're middle of the pack. They're 9. They give 117 per game, rush yards per game. So, I mean, that's pretty good. So I guess you could see Tate there, but I'm still going to go Brandon Oliver. I'm going to stick to it.
Good for you.
Shane Vereen versus the Jets or Justin Forsett versus the Falcons? Take your pick.
I have no idea what they're going to do in this backfield in New England, even though...
I think people should, if you have a roster spot, and I don't know if I do, but I would pick up James White if you can.
I think I may lead toward... I think Bolden was actually the one who got the carries when Ridley went out last week. I think Bolden may be the guy you want to look at. So I would look to see, maybe check Twitter and check some of the beat writers in New England about who's getting first-team carries this week. But I'm pretty sure Bolden was actually the one who got his carries when Ridley went out. So
I see now, this is according to RotoWorld.
Okay.
ESPN Boston says that Brandon Bolden is a core special teams player. So a lot of people think he'll step in, but beat writer Mike Reese isn't so sure, noting that Bolden already has a lot of responsibility on the special teams units.
Okay. Well, I know Mike Reese is actually a pretty respected guy, but he was also the one that guessed that Stephen Ridley was going to be cut.
That's a good point.
But from what
I was hoping
I've
you wouldn't
actually read
remember that, but
somebody
all
and
right.
What's that?
I was hoping you wouldn't remember that, but okay.
Yeah, but I also did read another article where they said that basically every year he does some out of the box predictions that he realizes is a long shot, but he could see how it happens. So I think that's what that fell into, but it just probably went pretty wild with the national media. But all that being said, I still think I'm going to go Justin Forsett because I think Atlanta has a pretty bad run defense, and Justin Forsett is also he runs it and catches the passes, where I don't know if you're going to see that from Vereen. He's more of just a pass guy. So I'll take Forsett.
Yeah, I'm going to take Forsett as well. All that talk, we're taking Forsett.
Yeah.
But, I mean, at the same time, Vereen could get more carries, but it could go to someone like White or Bolden or both. I mean, you just don't know.
Absolutely. Never know it. You never know with Bill Belichick.
Yeah, you really don't. It could go to you, Joe. You could get more carries this week.
I'm ready to go. Put me in.
Next up, Andre Williams at Dallas or Ronnie Hillman versus San Francisco. Take your pick.
You pick both guys that I told you I still don't like, but if I had to go with one, I'm probably going to have to go Ronnie Hillman.
Yeah, I would agree with that just because of the offense.
Yep.
It's more high-powered. Last one then, Frank Gore at Denver or Jeremy Hill at Indianapolis. Remember, if A.J. Green doesn't play this week, Jeremy Hill could get some more touches.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Gore is the safer pick here, but I think Jeremy Hill has a higher ceiling. I think if you've got the problem is that you're probably talking about Jeremy Hill as a flex guy, whereas Gore is probably a running back 1 or 2. So I think because of that, I'd go Gore. But I think who could have the bigger week? I may gamble on Jeremy Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. He got 8 carries last week, so that's not a lot. They ended up tying that game, which is weird even after the overtime and the 2 field goals. It's just odd. But Bernard, you saw, had a huge game. I think with Green being out, as much as it helps Sanu, it helps both running backs.
Yeah.
Just
and did
as
you
much.
see Bernard left the game for a little while with a shoulder injury, but he was able to come back. So just keep an eye on that. I don't know how serious. Obviously, it wasn't too serious because he came back into the game.
Yeah.
But that's just something to look going forward. I mean, Gio has had a pretty good workload, and he's doing a lot, and he's having a great season. But obviously, if you have Gio and Jeremy, and you don't have Jeremy Hill, you should try to get him.
Yeah, definitely, and I think you could see Jeremy Hill as a flex option. But between the two, I'm actually going to take a chance and go Jeremy Hill over Frank Gore, just because Gore's workload is also decreasing, and Jeremy Hill's is increasing. So there you go. I'm playing the trends.
I like it.
Next up, we do have a Twitter question from our good buddy Wes Koenig at Dub Snipes. He wants to know pick 3: Keenan Allen, Andre Holmes, Mike Floyd, or Brandon Cooks?
Well, obviously, you guys have all listened to the interview, and so I think you got to go Brandon Cooks, definitely. He would have been on there. I think I'm going to go who was after Andre Holmes, you said?
Michael Floyd.
I'm going to go with Floyd, especially with Palmer back. And between the other two, man.
I know, it's tough. I'm agree with you on those first two. I'm kind of curious to see where you're going to go on this last one. Because I'm actually personally going to go Keenan Allen, specifically because if Eddie Royal doesn't play, because Royal's been hurt and he hasn't practiced. So, I mean, it does help Keenan Allen, even though he still really hasn't done anything. But I'm gonna take the chance on Keenan Allen. He only had 3 catches for 27 yards last week. But if Eddie Royal doesn't play, definitely for me, Keenan Allen. Although Eddie Royal did practice on Wednesday, but I want to see Andre Holmes do it more.
Yeah, I understand where I think I'm going to pick Andre Holmes for the same reason you picked Jeremy Hill, just because I think he's a little bit more of a guy that I think I could see doing something pretty good. I mean, I think over the last couple of weeks he's looked solid. I mean, he had week 4 he had 74 yards and a touchdown against Miami. Week 5, 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. So his targets are getting higher each week, and his receptions are starting to become a little more steady. So I'm going to go with Andre Holmes. So, Wes, I don't know if that helps you because you're split down the middle.
Actually, I'm switching. I'm going Andre Holmes, too.
Boom. All right. I
talked me into it.
Convinced him. There we go.
Because you know what? I'm looking at his stats here. And like you said, last week he had 4 catches, 121 yards, 2 touchdowns. The week before that, 5 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. They had a bye the week before that, but against Houston, 5 catches, 45 yards. All those games are more than Keenan Allen has ever gotten this year.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's the reason I'm good. It's not that I'm so high on Andre Holmes. It's just I'm that low on Keenan Allen right now. But I will say, it does look like Eddie Royal might play. So if Royal somehow doesn't play, I'll switch that to Keenan Allen. But if Royal is gonna play, and it looks like he might, I'm gonna go with you. I'm gonna say.
All
Andre
right, I'm
Holmes.
gonna stick with Andre Holmes either way. So I've got Holmes, Floyd, and Cooks.
Yeah, we're both in agreement on Floyd and Cooks. So
All right, there we go.
that wraps it up for this week. Hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure you tune in next week, same time, same place. Check us out, nextlevelradioonline.com. That's where the rankings will be. If you need the link, go to facebook.com/nextlevelradioonline. Or go on Twitter at NXT Level Radio. Again, make sure you email in those questions or tweet us your questions. And like we did for Wes here, we will read them on the air and answer them. And it's even more fun when Steve's here because him and I usually disagree with Joe. So at NXT Level Radio, if you want, hashtag PTFF so we see it, or everybody sees it. Or email primetime at Next Level Radio Online. That's primetime, one word, at Next Level Radio Online. Or you can even tweet us individually. Joe is at JoeyWebb32, Steve is at SRichards31, and I'm at Adam Next Level. Check Steve's blog out, StephenRichards.net. Make sure you also subscribe to us on iTunes. Just search for Primetime Fantasy Football. And then also subscribe to Next Level Radio on iTunes as well. We have some shows called the Showcast, very good show with me and Ben, and then also we have some guest spotlights, some interviews and whatnot. And we actually have one next week coming up, so make sure you check that out. And I think that about wraps it up for this week. Anything else for you to add, Joe?
No, just good luck in your team this week.
All right, and like we said, email primetime at nextlevelradioonline.com or tweet at NXT Level Radio. We will see you for week number 8.
See you guys later.
Must be